All right. Well, welcome. This is a League of Women Voters candidate forum being conducted over Zoom. Today is October 5th, 2020. We're pleased to have the participation of incumbent Gary Leif and challenger Charles Lee. Both are candidates for the Oregon House District 2 seat in the Oregon House of Representatives. And the winner of this race will serve a 2-year term in the Oregon legislature. This forum is being recorded and will be made available from a link on our website, lwvuv.org. We will publicize it with a press release and spread the link through email and other places. It will be available at vote411.org, your source for nonpartisan election information. I am Jennifer Carloni, president of the League of Women Voters of Umpqua Valley. I will be the moderator for this event. Robin Wisdom is our tech person and host. Julie Wright is our timekeeper. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for opening remarks, 2 minutes to answer each question posed, and 1 minute for closing remarks. Julie will display a sign indicating when 30 seconds of a speaker's time remains, and a stop sign when the time has expired. League members and supporters submitted questions to us in advance. We drew names from a bucket to determine that Charles Lee will go first. So let's begin now with Charles Lee making his opening remarks.
Hello, I'm Charles Lee. I'm a lawyer in Roseburg. I've been a lawyer in private practice here for 45 years, since 1975. This event with the League of Women Voters is a little sentimental for me in that within the last 2 weeks, I was looking up some family history on newspapers.com, and I found a photograph from 1948, the fall of 1948, when I would have been 3 years old. The League of Women Voters was trying to get 100% voter registration in Racine, Wisconsin. And there was a big photo spread of my mother with me at her knee registering to vote at a League of Women Voters production there. I am a Democrat. I'm genetically a Democrat. I'm a lifelong Democrat. Why am I running here? Well, I have several levels of causation. One reason I'm running because I was asked to run. This is a district that is widely expected to go Republican. Mr. Leif, I'm expecting, is probably going to have the job in the fall. And yet I think it is important that somebody be on the ballot representing both sides, that somebody be present to show that there is a interest in a variety of points of view in Douglas County. The second interest that I have is that as a lawyer, I deal with individuals, small businesses, and nobody ever comes to see me because they're happy. People come to see me and I find things in the law that strike me as being incorrect or careless. And I think that as a lawyer, I would be of help to the community. Good grief, 2 minutes goes fast.
I guess it does, yes. Okay, well, thank you. And Mr. Leif. Oops, you need to unmute.
Don't start the clock yet. So thanks everyone for being here today. I'm currently your state representative for House District 2, and that is Roseburg to Grants Pass. Just a little history. I'm married to my best friend, Carol, who is actually my chief of staff. I'm a proud father, grandfather, and a great-grandfather. I've been in business for over 40 years. I've been involved in over 50 organizations and chaired probably half of those. Past chamber president, past CASA chairman of over 2 counties, past first citizen, past humanitarian recipient. So I've got a good history in the past. We sold our business back in 2016 when I became Douglas County's 104th county commissioner. In 2018, I was appointed to the House, and I'm now serving my second term as state representative, not a full term in 2018. It's an honor to be vice chair of the Water Committee. I'm on 2 Ways and Means subcommittees with Public Safety and Transportation. I'm a moderate conservative. I'm concerned and working with homelessness with Speaker Kotek. I've actually hired Michael Fieldman to be on my staff to work on homelessness, mental illness, and housing. Also, Mike is a Democrat, and he's on my staff. I'm all about removing bureaucracy. I'm about conservative spending, especially due to our economy and our economic hard times right now. I have a great voting record. I don't support tax increases, especially over the next couple of years. In 2019, the Democrats supported over $6 billion of taxes, and you see companies moving out of state constantly, even like Roseburg Forest Products, where they say they're going to more friendly states other than Oregon. So I'm proud to be here today, and I'm here to answer all your questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. You referred to the economy, and that's obviously an important issue. Clearly, it requires a lot of money to provide services that Oregonians need. So how do you prioritize those services? And we'll start with Mr. Leif.
So we are going to probably see about a $6 billion decrease in monies that are going to come to us. We take in about $75 billion in total revenues from the state. Most of that stuff is accounted to for transportation through ODOT, DHS, and other things. So we have very little amount of money that we're going to be able to actually work with, and we're going to have to work on both sides. One of the biggest problems I think you're going to see right now is the effects due to COVID with DHS and children abuses, and they're going to be on the chopping block. And I'm going to be there trying to help support those increases to be able to take care of those. Where are we going to cut? You know, it's going to be real interesting when we start seeing the numbers come out from the speaker and the governor. We'll have to look at that. There's not an easy way to do this. We've already cut about $2 billion right now in services as we go forward. So we're going to have to really hunker down, and everybody's going to have to work together.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lee.
Yeah, I do not have any magic answer for how we go forward this fall and the coming year. I don't know yet what the effect is going to be economically on the state. We assume it's going to be bad, but the news in the last couple of weeks seem to be that revenues are holding up better than had been expected. I think we want to expend our money in Oregon in accordance with Oregon values, which includes outdoor life, clean water. It includes respect for individuals. And of course, my interest, my expertise involves in large part the way the law reacts with family or with people who have been accused of or have been victims of crimes. I think that we want to be able to spend our money in ways that are as locally controlled as possible and as directed to the welfare of individuals as possible. And it is an appropriate thing, I think, for us to be cutting back on bureaucracy across the state. My experience in life has been that organizations tend to grow beyond the point that they're needed. It's just part of the biology of organizations, and that it's appropriate to be trimming those things back. Thank you.
All right, so thank you. You've both acknowledged that we'll need to be careful with Oregon's money. Do you have any ideas for generating more revenue if needed? And we'll start with Charles Lee.
Well, we've got these things on the ballot here that are going to be taxing vapes. It seems to me that that's an appropriate thing to be doing. The sin taxes are relatively heavy. I don't smoke, but I do drink, so I favor cigarette taxes more than I do alcohol taxes. I think we all tend to be that way. Beyond that, I think we would want to be looking at, to some extent, transportation taxes, the trucks that use our highways, the railroads that do create danger in what they're doing. But I think those are the directions that we're going to be looking. I suspect I would like to see income taxes. I think we could stand to have income taxes higher on a national scale. And Oregon is tied to the federal income tax system. The notion that President Trump can be as wealthy as he claims to be with as little income as he claims to have would indicate to me that we might want to think about decoupling Oregon income taxes from federal taxes with regard to real estate credits and that sort of thing. But those are ideas in my mind. It's nothing that I can claim to be an expert on.
Thank you. And Mr. Leif? Oops, sorry, the mute.
Sorry, I should be used to that by now. So it's kind of interesting. You talk about specific programs trying to increase taxes. So that $2 a pack cigarette tax won't go to the general fund. It'll go to specific programs. So it's not money that we can grab on and just use for anything else. You look at transportation taxes right now. That's created from people and industries who are buying diesel gas and regular gas. That tax goes into transportation, and that's down specifically because businesses have been down. They're kind of increasing now, but not a lot of people have been traveling during a certain time. So again, that specifically goes to those programs. So when you look at trying to increase revenue for the general fund, the way that I see it is you need to incentivize businesses. When I talk to a lot of the industries right now who are simply moving out of Oregon, it's because of all of the restrictions in an unfriendly environment in Oregon. And it's costing businesses more than what they can afford to pay. So if you want to incentivize, and that could be in a lot of different ways, to create industry, especially in rural Oregon, that would be probably one of the best things that you can do. But looking at adding taxes is not going to help.
Okay, thank you. The next question will go first to Mr. Leif, and it is that changes in timber tax laws in the late 1990s have cost counties $3 billion in the past 3 decades, according to the Oregon Legislative Revenue Office. What plans, if any, do you have to rebalance timber taxing structure?
You know, that's a really interesting question. As I go back and look at the history of that, they started to pay basically property taxes on all their timbers. So they would have an even scale of receiving taxes rather than just waiting for them to cut timber and then to pay taxes. So 1 year you wouldn't have very much taxes, the next year you would have a lot. So that property tax that they pay on that was to kind of even that out right now. If you're going to look at trying to add $3 billion more in timber taxes, well, then you might want to consider the fact that Roseburg Forest Products is buying all of the timber companies in the South, Louisiana, you know, a lot of the southern states. And that's because it's more friendly, doesn't cost as much. They want industry, people want to work. So you can tax them right out of Oregon if you want to. But I would say we need to sit down at the table before we start trying to increase and lose our timber companies.
Okay, Mr. Lee?
Well, that's an interesting thing. I mean, I remember when there was changes made to the timber taxes, and we were told at that time that it was supposed to be neutral. It was pushed, of course, by people in the industry making the same sort of arguments that Gary's making now. And now the study seems to indicate that, looking at it over a period of quite a few years, that it has in fact cost local governments and the state money. I think we want to look at going back to the way things were, if that's really the credible information. And it seems to me that is the credible information right now. It's a difficult thing in Oregon. We are exposed to such an extent to arguments from one side or the other of the pro-industry people or the anti-industry people, and we tend to just take sides after a while. And I think we have to look closely at what the issue is in order to make decisions. The world of timber is not just best served by those people that cut and process trees. The community has an interest in having healthy forests at the same time as it has forests that provide jobs. So I think we want to be open to revamping the timber taxes.
All right, well, thank you. And the next question will go first to Mr. Lee, and that is it important for the state to have a rainy day fund? And do you support changing the kicker rebate law?
Yeah, I think the kicker rebate law was another one of those things that sounded like a good thing for the citizens and has turned out not to make a lot of sense. It would be nice to have a rainy day fund. Our experience, of course, is anytime we have a rainy day fund, we declare that it's raining and we spend that money. But it does not make sense for us, as we do now, to be returning money to taxpayers at the same time that we are saying that we are lacking money that we need to raise to maintain services. So yes, I think the kicker was foolish. I think it'd be nice to have a rainy day fund. I don't know how practical that is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Leif?
Remember to unmute. So, it's kind of interesting. The e-board has emergency dollars, and they've been using that as much as they possibly can. They've been very, I think, open to use that. I would consider that kind of a rainy day fund. But if you're talking about creating another rainy day fund, I'm not sure that we would need to do that the way the system's set up right now. So let's talk about the kicker rebate law for just a minute. So I was called into a meeting with the governor back in 2018 or 19 when she talked about taking, I think, $500 million to pay down PERS, and asked if I would support reducing the kicker rebate. And my answer to her was, that's not our money. We didn't vote on that. Legislators need to be understanding the people that voted on that. So I'm all about taking that back to the people and asking them for their opinion. But until that time, it's not our money. We can't just remove that. And it's just like Oregonians 15 times in the past have voted against sales taxes. We've got to listen to the people. And there's one thing that I think we need to really understand. There's a real rural divide between the metropolitan areas and the rural areas. And so it costs us a lot more in the rural areas when some people do take away things like the kicker rebates. They look forward to that tax. I think we had $2 billion in rebates that are coming back this biennium. So I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that the people asked for that, and before we take away the people, we have to ask them again. Thank you. Okay.
what is the state's role in assisting those who've lost income, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and the wildfires? And Gary, can you speak to that first?
So be a little more specific. What do you mean the state's role? Are you talking about unemployment? What are you talking about?
That is part of it, yeah. Is that, and are there other programs that the states should enact to help people?
Okay. All right, start the timer now, Julie. So, you know, my biggest job before COVID was working on child abuse cases with DHS and the problems that we had with that system. Once COVID hit, my biggest role is now unemployment. So I have back doors into the unemployment division, which allow me to help people. I probably helped over 1,000 people receive their unemployment. People who could not get through on the phones, people who couldn't get emails back. Our employment department is broken. We have $85 billion, I'm sorry, $1 million sitting in a fund to help fix that. And yet we didn't fix it. We just gave away $35 million to people at $500 checks that lasted a day and a half and only served under 50%. We've got a broken system and we need to fix that. So that's probably the first thing. You know, we've been working, you know, in every way that we can with food stamps and with other programs. There are a lot of different programs out there that people can get to. My job is to help them get through the system, and I've been very successful at that, and I'm very proud of my help. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Charles, your thoughts on the state's role in assisting those who've lost income due to especially COVID and the wildfires?
That's an interesting situation, which is kind of a stupid thing to say. I acknowledge that. The government, the community, has an interest in people maintaining their income and their lifestyle, in people being able to pay their bills. And that's different from the need to protect people who are in dire straits and homeless. The community works best if people have the kind of income that they expect so they can pay their bills to support the economy and keep things going. I really have the impression that the federal government in this event has spent a lot of money to try to inject money into the economy to keep the economy flowing and doing well. It was the original purpose of the unemployment system after the Great Depression to try to maintain income stability, not because it was fair to the particular person who lost their job, but because it was important for the community as a whole to do that. COVID, unemployment compensation, though, is not an answer to everybody's problems. Some people don't get unemployment compensation because they weren't working. Some people don't get very much unemployment compensation because they didn't have very much of a job, because they had to work at multiple low-hour jobs trying to support their families. I think it takes a multi-headed system. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. And also related to the economy, I think we hear a lot about the urban-rural divide. So what role should the state play in helping small towns and rural areas thrive? And we'll start with Mr. Leif.
It's my turn, yeah.
Or no, Mr. Leif, sorry. Right. Go ahead, Charles.
Okay. I wish we had different names. It would be easier to keep this straight. Well, the urban-rural divide. I've lived in Roseburg for a long time. I've been active in the Democratic Party and attended functions in Portland where I have dealt with Portland Democrats. And I remember particularly a number of years ago when I had the impression that people in Portland thought it'd be a good idea to make it a felony to cut down a mature fir tree. There's really a need to be able to communicate between people in the big cities and people in the small towns and vice versa. One of the things that I have enjoyed is being able to be part of those conversations with people who share my same basic democratic values, but who live in a world where they learn things that just aren't true about small towns. And I can tell you that down here in Roseburg, we all are told things and learn things about people in Portland that just aren't true. We have to be able to communicate better. I think that Roseburg would be better served if we had somebody in the legislature who, in fact, talked on the same level and in the same language with people from urban Oregon, as opposed to this notion that we should leave Oregon and become part of Idaho. That I think is the sort of talk that exacerbates the urban-rural divide. I think when we all talk together, we realize that we all do better if we all do better. But we have to avoid trying to create a sense of enmity between the different parts of the state.
Thank you. And Mr. Leif?
You know, we have this one size fits all kind of system right now. I've talked to the governor on several occasions, and she acknowledges that sometimes that doesn't work well for us. Give you a perfect example. When we voted on rent control here a couple of years ago, while that might have been really good for Portland, and I actually would vote for that in Portland, it actually really hurt us in the rural areas that, you know, people had invested money for them to have rentals, and all of a sudden we have rent control now that doesn't bode well, and so I see a lot of people that are pulling out, investing in those kinds of things just because we have a one size fits all. Another thing would be to kind of explain when we get people that go through the community college and sometimes through their degrees, you know, they look to find where the most money is, which is maybe up in Portland, for example. But in fact, they spend more money, it costs more money. And so we need to kind of work on trying to help that. And that's one of the reasons why I was a part of the second highest capital construction in the state that the governor approved, to be able to try our medical education center, which is to try and get people to be trained in the medical training areas like radiologist, nursing, all that stuff, but then to be able to pay for those services from the rural areas, from medical places that will pay for their education to keep them there. The CTE program is huge also in keeping those. That rural divide is very, very apparent, that we have this one size fits all, and we have to work to try and fix that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, that is a good segue to the world of healthcare. And my question for Mr. Leif to start is, the COVID-19 pandemic has heightened our awareness that we are all in this together, and that we do not all have equal access to healthcare. What can the legislature do to make sure that everyone living in Oregon has access to the healthcare they need when they need it?
To me, or
Yeah.
both is L, Leaf. Okay, you know, A lot of those things are the federal programs. So all we can do in the legislature is try and enhance them. But also we need to make sure that our system is easily accessible. For example, when we just talked about how the employment division is completely derailed, where people can't get into the system and get help into that. So my suggestion, or how I want to do it, is try to work with federal programs to make sure we enhance and do everything that we have locally. I work really closely with a lot of the medical carriers like ADAPT, like Mercy, all those things. They're trying to provide the best services they have with the tools that they have available. So as we look at the future, trying to enhancing those in an economy that we don't have the money to do, so we're going to have to be really innovative in trying and help to get people into those systems. That's why I hired Mike Fieldman to help with mental illness right now, because that's a very important part of the problem that we had. We went from 12 mental health facilities in Oregon down to 1 right now. And so we are all dependent on the local carriers to try and get those people in, and yet we don't have the services all available, and all that costs money. So we're doing the best that we can with the money that we have available. I don't know that there's any legislative fix other than to continue to work with the federal government and make sure that everybody has access to our system, and to make sure that it's easy and accessible, unlike the employment department. Thank you.
Okay.
Over the years, in dealing with families, I have noticed a tremendous increase in access to medical care since the adoption of the Federal Affordable Care Act and the creation of the medical organizations that help to deliver those services. When we talk about wanting to work with federal agencies in order to deliver health care for Oregonians, I think we have to also be speaking out against the nationwide attempts to try to gut or defund those very federal programs. That's all important. I can't say, I've been impressed in the last few years with the great burden of a lot of the uninsured having been reduced. I see once again where the hospitals and the care providers are doing work that I can't see how they get paid for it. Charity work for people that have serious needs and no possible way to handle it. The COVID, if it gets to be, if it requires hospitalization and that kind of treatment, I've not heard of people in Oregon who don't get hospitalization for COVID if they need it. The more important thing is to make sure that we still have people able to get routine care when they first realize that they're sick. And I think that, as Gary said, that means that we have to depend upon federal resources. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's shift to the topic of education, which is also quite different lately. And we'll start with Mr. Lee on this one. What is the most important thing the state can do to support our education systems at this time?
I think the state has to continue to enforce and urge personal behaviors that are consistent with reducing the frequency of the COVID infections. The schools cannot open if there's a substantial chance that those kids are going to be carrying infections home to their family and their grandparents if they're going to be sharing infections with staff and teachers. The schools are trying very hard to do something that they're not suited to, which is to find a way to distance learn kids effectively. But this thing isn't going to be over until the epidemic is over. We may be. I mean, I've got 25 years on the school board. I've never seen anything at all like this. My first thought was, oh, well, the schools are closed. I guess we're going to lay everybody off. That, of course, is inconsistent with that discussion we just had about maintaining economic stability in the community. And instead, I think they've been doing a good job of trying to maintain as many services for kids as they can, as long as those services can be provided in a safe way. I don't think that the state can thereby give the schools more money and make it better. I think the only way to make it better is to insist on us wearing our masks and keeping our distances and doing our best to get the infection rate down to where we can safely reopen the schools again. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Leif, your thoughts on that?
Jenny, can you repeat the question?
Yes. What's the most important thing the state can do to support education systems at this time?
All right, thank you for the question. And, you know, I think especially in rural Oregon, that's very, very important. We need to build a K-14 system. So right now we have a K-12 CTE program. And if you remember, CTE over the last 20 years has completely gone away. So CTE was to train welders and auto mechanics and you know, things that kids were interested in as they left college because, as they left high school, because they couldn't stay in high school because they weren't interested in arithmetic and science and history, but they were interested in being able to have a career which was a hands-on working job in the future. And so I actually have a bill this session in 2021 to expand the current K-12 system to K-14. So it would bring in community colleges into the career technical education, like with STEAM and other things, which would completely enhance rural Oregon right now. Right now we have a K-12 CTE system that's completely separate than the community colleges. If we merge those together, like I proposed in our bill, we will have prosperity where those kids will actually go through, and not through a 2-year program, not actually having to get a degree, but actually getting a certificate and whatever that might be, to keep those kids employed in rural Oregon right now. And I think that will help rebalance what we have going on, which we've lost for the last 20 years. I'm really proud of the bill that I'm going to be putting forward in 2021. I hope you guys will all support it.
Okay, related to that, many families right now in the age of COVID-19 are relying on internet to do school and meetings online. Stable internet has become a necessity, not a luxury. So what are your ideas for bringing high-speed, affordable internet to rural parts of Oregon? And we'll start with Gary Leif.
So we supported this, I think in 2019, a bill that came forward in trying to rebalance that. You know, my hope and my goal is to get kids back in the classroom because I think really what we're looking at right now is the decay of children learning. And I actually talked to a bunch of, I think they were 5th graders the other day, asking them how online system works for them. And they said it didn't work. And I asked, so why didn't it work? And their answer was because if we ask a question, the whole classroom hears what our question is, and we don't know if it's a dumb question or not. Whereas when we're in the classroom, we can say, hey, come on over. I've got a question for you right now. So the question goes back to, you know, high-speed internet. We absolutely need that, but we need to get back into the classroom. So we're working, I think, diligently on providing high speed. We've got lots of programs from the federal government that did this. We gave extra funding to be able to do that in the state in 2019. But that's not the answer for our education. We need to get back to the classroom. We need to help those children. And we're going to have a problem when those kids go back to school, because a lot of them are going to be left behind because they didn't ask the questions and they didn't even log on. You realize 25% of the students didn't even log on in the spring of 2020. They didn't even log on. So imagine we go back to school, we're going to have a huge problem. And a lot of them didn't log on because they don't have the internet. They don't have the capability of doing that. It's a debacle, and we are going to pay for that in big times. And thank you.
Okay, thank you. Charles, you can continue on that.
Well, I mean, there's no doubt, I think, that the distance learning has not been very effective for a lot of kids. It works out fine for some, but for a lot of kids it doesn't. But we don't have a choice, because the schools cannot be open as long as the epidemic is strong. With regard to the question, which I'm trying to remember, it had to do with, in terms of education, should we be guaranteeing rapid internet service for everyone? I have the impression that over recent years there have been communication-related grants and extension of internet service to lots more places than it used to be. I think that question of the extension of internet service infrastructure is better handled outside of the education bureaucracy, but in the world of regulating commerce. Schools have provided kids who have access to that internet with the hardware, all the personal computers that have been distributed out. That doesn't always help if the and the schools have created mobile hotspots to try to increase the chance of kids to get electronic learning. But I don't think that creating an internet infrastructure is really, it's what the schools ought to be doing. I think they're going to do the best they can while the epidemic is raging, and then we're going to go back to having kids in school. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you for your thoughts on those questions. And let's move on to considerations regarding the wildfires that we've been experiencing and our changing climate. Obviously, the federal government is going to have a role to play in helping people in response to their losses, but what are the state actions that you think should be considered to assist those who've lost homes and have been affected by the wildfires, but also more broadly around our changing climate, the drought, and forest management? So that's a lot to consider, but Mr. Lee, would you like to start?
That's 4 or 5 questions all in one. Well, the forest management, that's one of those catchphrases that people throw around a lot as if it's a solution, without ever really defining what people mean by forest management. Disaster relief. Well, disaster relief is important, but I think we're going to be looking to the feds to be trying to replace people's homes more than the state to be doing that sort of thing. I'm impressed with what I see about efforts of organizations to create one-stop places where people can get information about the different programs that are available, where people can get advice about how to deal with their fire insurers, where people can find out how to replace the documents that they had that were burned up. That reaction of creating those sorts of things struck me as a really Oregon kind of a bypassing of what would in Washington, D.C. be an opportunity for a 3-year bureaucratic bungle. I'm trying to get my hands around the question again.
Well,
what,
perhaps I should interrupt here. Maybe let's break it into 2 questions. So the first one you've addressed there, and we could give you 30 seconds more, say, on disaster response, and then we'll talk about the other issues in a separate question. How's that?
Okay, well, good. And I think I've largely said what I wanted to say about disaster response. There are federal organizations in place to do a lot of the heavy lifting. I think the state should assist people in accessing that kind of relief. I think that we've been doing a fairly good job of that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Gary?
Thank you for breaking the question down into 2 right now, because it is 2 completely different questions. But as far as the disaster response, it's really not the state's criteria to do all that all at the same time. So you've got FEMA involved in that. They're assisting families right now. Just in Talent in Phoenix, they lost 2,500 homes. So it's not just the assistance that might be in financial, but they don't have 25 different housing places for people to go in right now. So people are donating their RVs. They're working with the insurance companies to try and get them into a special housing, wherever that might be. But I'm not sure that the state can do anything more than we're currently doing in our communities. Right now, we have 158 new housing developments that are coming out just on out Diamond Lake Boulevard right now. We should be able to handle that housing in our area as we look up towards Diamond Lake. We didn't lose 2,500. We lost, I'm not even sure, less than 100. And so we can probably handle that locally. But when you go to Multnomah and some of those areas up there, again, they're back into the thousands of homes right now. So the state can't just jump in and build a house for them. We have to work together locally with FEMA, their insurance companies, the local organizations, to be able to provide whatever response they might need, including housing, including clothing, including their kids, so they can get their computers and get back online, and all that's that goes along with that. I mean, thank you.
Okay. So I agree. The federal government is probably going to need to do a lot there. And but looking forward to being somewhat proactive about the future, what are other state actions that should be considered for the long term around our changing climate, the ongoing drought, and forest management practices? And Gary, can you start?
Oh, you got first names. That makes it easier, because
I think so.
Leif and Lee sound the same right now. So, so what you're asking really about is fire forest management. Is that correct?
Well, many people would say, scientists would say, that our climate is changing, and some of the things that are going on in the forests are related to that. And there are a lot of things that are related here. So what can we do around managing climate, drought, and potential fire?
So great question. You know, I'm the vice chair on the water committee, and that's one of our really important questions right now we have, because there is something changing with our climate, whatever you want to call it, climate change, whatever it is. You know, we've had a 1 degree increase in our temperature. We have less water in certain areas. One of the things that we looked at, myself and our chair, is we don't want to have the same problem that California's having right now with their water. So what we have come up with, and we have limited funds and limited resources, but we work with Harney County right now in a collaboration. Collaborations, I think, are the way to the future of our success. And so they have been charged with trying to reduce their water outtake, you know, watering their crops and all that stuff, by 50% in 10 years. And they've agreed in a collaborative effort across the board with all of their producers to reduce 3% per year over the next 10 years, which will equal about 50% when you look at it compounded each year. Collaborations, I think, are the way that we need to work. Collaborations in Bend are huge. When they did their thinning projects and their burning, their underbrush projects, those were so successful that they didn't have fires in Bend for the first time. That was done collaboratively. We don't need legislation to come out and tell people you need to do this and this and this. If we can work collaboratively with groups and organizations, counties and cities, we can do a lot without legislative arm telling people and creating huge bureaucracy. So I think we need to work on those efforts as much as we can. And I think we need to do some thinning projects and some fire breaks to stop the current fires that we have going on. So it's either let it burn or try and come up with some collaboratively efforts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Charles?
Yeah, I think we all prefer it if social problems will get solved without having the legislature in the middle of it. Sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. The forest management issue here, as I understand it as a non-forester, is that we have a lot of undergrowth that burns readily. We have a lot of small trees that burn readily. We have a failure to maintain the woods in ways that would reduce the likelihood of catastrophic fires. Now, historically, there have been catastrophic fires. I was reading in 1864 a fire that burned from Corvallis to the coast. Much of the state forest in western Douglas County is the remnants of areas that burned and then were reprod and cut a long time ago. But I suspect that it would be a good thing if we put a burden on landowners or on producers that cut timber to maintain the cut over lands in ways that are less likely to burn in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your thoughts on that. And let's move on to another topic. The question is, do you support legislation to require background checks before all weapons purchases and secure storage of weapons in homes and automobiles? And how can people with differing viewpoints work together to reduce the epidemic of gun violence? Charles?
Again, a couple different questions there. Let me get started. Oregon has a very strong state constitutional protection relating to weapons. I have dealt through my career with lots of people with different kinds of backgrounds, and I have seldom found that a background check is a useful way of predicting how a person is going to act in the future. A firearm is a dangerous thing, and to my way of thinking, it should never be left unsecured. So in answer to your parts of that question is I do favor laws requiring secure storage and leaving either a regulatory or criminal penalty or a financial liability penalty on people who have firearms that are not adequately stored and cause harm. I'm not sure about the benefit of doing much more background check or interfering with putting stumbling blocks on transfers of firearms. And that's what I remember as being the question. So I guess that's my answer. Thank you.
Okay. And the second part of the question, I guess, yeah, it is kind of like two questions, was how to bring people together on the issue. But would you like to address that briefly?
Well, it's guns. I hate to make an admission like this in Douglas County. Guns to me are like tattoos. I do not understand the attraction of having a gun. I don't understand why people want to have tattoos. I think that there's been an epidemic of social policy trying to make people think of guns as almost as personal adornments. And I would like us to have conversations about why people need a gun, why a gun is good in certain circumstances, and why you should only have a gun in those circumstances. I think we need to have we need to talk about guns without starting out from a religious point of view, that either I'm a pro-religious gun person or I'm an anti-gun religious person. I don't know if that makes much sense, but that's the best I can do.
Okay, well, thank you for your thoughts. And Gary, your thoughts on the issue?
So, we already do background checks on weapons. I'm not sure what else you want to do. Everything goes through the Oregon State Police. They look and find out if you have any problems on your record that would prevent you from having a gun. And so when you're saying, do we want more legislation on this? Again, this goes back to the same thing that we talked about before. One size does not fit all. We need to make sure that we are educating people, not legislating them. When my opponent says that every gun should be stored securely, I have a gun on my nightstand. Does that mean it's not secure? If somebody breaks into my house, I want to make sure that I protect my family. I have 3 kids, 6 grandkids, 2 great-grandkids. We have all taught great education with firearms. Everyone in my family knows how to safely store a firearm, but every one of our children also knows that they don't touch a gun if it is, in fact, out in reach of a child. And obviously, when they're very young, we always secured ours in a safe or something like that. But I'm not going to tell Oregonians that they're going to have to lock all their guns up and they can't have them on their nightstand. That's just crazy. That's just socialist, in my opinion. And no, I'm not for that. Educate, do not legislate.
Okay, thank you. And the next question, we've lately seen armed protesters and counter protesters at public events around the state, including the Timber Unity rallies in Salem And the League of Women Voters does support nonviolent protest, but do you consider showing up for a protest while bearing arms a nonviolent and appropriate practice? And we'll start with Gary.
You know, that's interesting. So in our Constitution, it allows people to carry their gun wherever they are. Now, I have a concealed carry permit. I carry it with me everywhere. My wife has one. Our daughters have one. So we're very, very conscientious about, you know, when we carry, where we carry. And sometimes I might even open carry because I want to take my shirt, my coat off or something else like that. To protest at a rally and carry arms, that's their constitutional right. You can't take that away from them. You may not agree with it. For example, I probably wouldn't do it, but I can't, in my mind, take away their constitutional right to have that gun wherever they are. That's their right. So no, I'm absolutely not going to take that right away as long as it's available to them via our Constitution in Oregon.
And Charles, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's, in my opinion, Oregon has a very broad constitutional right regarding firearms. At the same time, in my opinion, if somebody is carrying a firearm at a public demonstration, that's a form of bullying. They're doing that perhaps because they realize that their argument is not very strong, and instead they will implicitly threaten anybody who disagrees with them by pointing out that they have access to a greater degree of force than the person that they're dealing with. I think carrying firearms at a demonstration, particularly openly, is unpleasant, unintelligent, violent in the same way that the use of profanity and vulgar attacks would be violent. But I do think that it's probably covered by Oregon's constitutional provisions. Something can be stupid and constitutional at the same time.
Okay. Acknowledging that. And let's see. Let's start with, where am I now? Next question, we'll start with Charles. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, anti-racism, anti-oppression, what back? And we'll start with Charles.
Okay, and I did not hear your question. It was like your mic went off or something.
Oh, sorry. Are you hearing me now?
I'm hearing you now.
I
heard you say diversity, equity, inclusion, and then you talked for a while longer and I didn't hear that part.
Nor did I.
It's about your work in or knowledge of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how this will help you in your role as a legislator.
I grew up in a whites only, a Scandinavian only neighborhood. I married a woman of Japanese extraction. My sister married a black fella. And I discovered that people they're not all the same. We differ and cultures differ. I also learned that as a fellow with a certain limited amount of background, when I encounter people that are different from me, it makes me unsure, hesitant, probably affects the way that I deal with people. I have come to realize that experience that I have myself is in fact that terrible thing that we call racism. And that even though 50 years ago we could criticize the Montgomery, Alabama police for what they were doing so overtly, that very lack of confidence that I have in myself in dealing with people that appear to be different has bad effects for those people. Now, those folks also have difficulty understanding somebody from my background, but that doesn't adversely affect me nearly as much. These things that we've had happening in cities, violence and stuff, it really brings home that there are some people who feel they are so ill-served by the majority community that they don't feel like they have any loyalty to that community. That's not a behavior that we can tolerate, but I think it's one we can understand. Thank you.
Thank you. And Gary?
So I supported the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee that goes on at the Capitol, and they have been, I want to say, phenomenal at making sure that we don't have any of that stuff going on in the Capitol. And actually, I was totally surprised to learn at some of that division and why it's even here in 2020. I don't believe I'm a racist in any way, shape, or form. I'm inclusive in everyone and everybody that I talk to. I don't look at any problems with how I deal with people. I give 100% of my of me when I'm talking with anybody from any place, and so. Of course, I absolutely support, our division with equity and inclusion, what we're doing in the state in our committee. And like I say, I am not a racist at all.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you. Okay, well, we've raised a lot of issues here, and there are issues that need to be discussed. One of the things that the League of Women Voters supports and encourages is respectful civil discourse. And so what ideas do you have for bringing those with differing views together to find solutions to problems? Do you have any models or suggestions to point to or suggest? And can we start with Gary?
I think bottom line, communication is the most important thing that we can bring to any differences that we have. You can't have hate speech. You can't have any hateful conversations going on. You need to sit at the table and have a conversation about what you can support. And if you start with the things that you can and don't work on the things that you can't, sooner or later you get trust. And I think trust is the most important thing when you have a respectful discourse. We had a great committee meeting that had, I think there was 90% of us that disagreed with us when we talked about the agricultural ditches. And we had a lot of the environmental communities that disagreed with that, but through respectful conversations, respectful communications, and it took about a year, maybe a little less than a year, 90% of everybody supported that. And we actually created a law in 2019 that allowed for those agricultural ditches to be expanded and work with those communities. That's how you do it, is you sit down at the table, you have respectful conversations, you agree to disagree, and you work on the parts that you can agree with, and slowly and surely you gain respect for one another, and you start to work out on the fringes. And that's how I believe we need to do it. We need to do a lot more of it. And I'll tell one last thing. I'm highly respected at the Capitol, even though I don't agree with maybe the speaker or the president or the governor. I've never once thrown a grenade at them, and they have always let me through the door, and they've always asked my opinion because they respect me.
Okay, and Charles.
Well, I hate to agree with Gary. We have to avoid thinking of discussions as things that we win or lose. I was a debater in high school, and there we were taught to argue both sides of a question, which is, of course, good for a lawyer. But also what it taught us was that you weren't judged on whether you won or lost. You were judged on the quality of your reasoning and the quality of your arguments, the logic of it. It's so different from the political debates that we see today, which are more like street fights. A good conversation means that both sides have the openness to listen to what the other person says, to question their own assumptions as well as the other guy's assumptions, and really then investigate the quality of the thinking that's behind our opinions. It's a lot less noisy than a lot of conversations we have, but it's the way we're going to get out of this. And I am worried that the media and society has gotten more and more aimed at winners or losers and defining winners or losers as being the way that we conduct our civil discourse. And that's not going to work in the long run. Thanks.
Thank you. Question has been asked, how do you feel about the Greater Idaho proposal? Charles?
I laugh. My father grew up in Seattle with a fellow named Emmett Watson. They played baseball together. Emmett Watson became a newspaper columnist for the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, and he created the Lesser Seattle movement in the 1950s because he really didn't like the way that the city was developing. It was a humorous thing. I look upon the joining Idaho as a humorous statement that's put out by some people. They're not taking it, I'm not really looking at it seriously. I don't think of it as even quite as serious as the former discussion about the state of Jefferson. Southwest Oregon is historically, culturally, and irredeemably, I'm not sure what adverb I'm looking for, connected to the rest of the state. And I think we're part of Oregon forever. That's my stand.
Okay, thank you. And Gary?
You know, that topic brings out the rural divide that we have in Oregon. When you're sitting in rural Oregon and we look at a tax that might be accepted in Portland, like the gross receipts tax, that they could certainly afford it, that they could certainly pay for it. But then when we look at how that affects our industries in the rural Oregon, it can put them out of business. And I use Umpqua Dairy as a really good example. Sometimes Umpqua Dairy loses money, but yet they still have to pay over $300,000 in gross receipts tax. And so when people start looking at why is it that Portland, that metropolitan area controls the whole state, it's no wonder that we look at the state of Jefferson or the Idaho, what is it called? Idaho something. Anyways, and I think what it does more importantly, regardless of whether you support it or whether you don't, it sends a message to the legislators who are making these laws that are hurting rural areas like Southern Oregon, for example. And whether or not that will ever happen, whether or not Greater Idaho, that's the name of it, happens, it's important to recognize that that message needs to be heard in the metropolitan areas. It's not fair that we have one single law that is supposed to affect everyone. And I think that's what the Greater Idaho message sends to the legislators.
Okay, we're coming to the end here, but is there a question or a topic that we have not addressed or asked about that you'd like to address in 2 minutes now? And we could start with Gary.
So is this our ending statement, or is
No, this is even prior to your ending statement. You have 2 minutes here to address an issue that we may not have addressed if you'd like, and you can pass if you don't.
No, I think that the message is just like what I talked about a few minutes ago, and that's it's the general divide that we have in the state. You know, back, I think it was in the 1950s, we had each senator represented by each county, which gave a true voice to rural Oregon. And right now we've split it up into districts. We've created this wheel and hub, and that wheel and hub is controlled by the metropolitan areas. I think we need to revamp that system, and we're going to be doing that in 2021. They're going to be redistricting, and we need to be cognizant of that rural divide when we redistrict, because we just don't want one particular metropolitan area controlling the whole state. And I would say that would probably be the topic we really need to address when we talk about redistricting in 21.
Okay, and Charles?
Well, redistricting is an interesting question. I actually ran for the legislature once before in 2000, 20 years ago. I ran against Jeff Cruz, and I was younger, much younger and much more enthusiastic, and spent a bunch of time and a bunch of money, and really worked on trying to deal with Sutherland, because I could see that Sutherland was developing as a place where I was more likely to find Democrats. At the end of that term, they redistricted, and Sutherland wound up in the northern district. And here where I lived, I got more of Glendale and other places. And it was clear to me that at that point, when the redistricting was done, it was to reflect constituencies that were consistent with the people that were serving in those different districts. And I've always found that that's what happens. I've wondered if we couldn't have senators representing people whose social security numbers ended in 00 and 01, and that would be 50% of the population. Obviously, that would there would be no more urban-rural divide, but I suspect what would happen then is that all of the legislators would be kowtowing to the majority in the big cities. I don't think that would work out either. I'm eager to see how redistricting works. I am fond of the idea that each person's vote should count the same as everybody else's, which was not working out very well when each senator represented a different county. But I guess it's an interesting question to which I do not have an answer. So, thank you.
Okay, an important issue for sure, redistricting. Thank you for bringing it up. At this time, we will move to closing remarks, and you have 1 minute for telling the voters again about who you are and how they might vote for you, or why they might vote for you. Let's see. Who went? Let's see. Charles, you started the opening remarks. Would we want to let Gary start the closing remarks, or what's
Okay with me?
Okay, go ahead, Gary.
All right, thank you. First of all, thank you everybody for being a part of this. These are great questions. I think it's really important that we have a great communication. I think that's why I make a great representative. If you talk to people, like I say, I'm that moderate Republican. I work on both sides. I am conservative on our spending. I do believe in our Second Amendment rights, but I am respected by everyone up in the Capitol. I'm respected by the governor. I'm respected by the speaker, but I'm also endorsed by a lot of people. So Ask Me has been endorsed me. NFIB has endorsed me. OEA has endorsed me. ORCOPS has endorsed me. The Roseburg Chamber, the Sheriffs of Oregon, Timber Unity. I have 25 different endorsements right now for me to be your next state representative. And I really appreciate the time that you've given me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Charles?
In contrast to that, I've run an absolutely invisible campaign. I haven't gotten contributions from anybody. I haven't sought endorsements from anybody. And that may be because I'm just by nature not a politician. I do think that I would be a good person to represent Southwestern Oregon in the legislature because I really find that urban-rural divide is an ugly, bad thing that should be minimized. And I think that we can do that by being, as a member of the majority party, being able to take part in the communications within that party and represent this area's interest in the majority party where it really makes some difference. I think instead we've had a political polity here that emphasizes the enmity between the big city and the Southwestern Oregon, and that's not going to work out for us in the end. Thank you.
All right, well, I'd like to thank you both very much. Thank you, Gary Leif and Charles Lee, who are both running for House District 2. And I'd like to say to the voters, please be sure that your voter registration is up to date by October 13th and that you know how to vote. Ballots will be placed in drop boxes, ballots may be placed in drop boxes till 8 p.m. on November 3rd or mailed with no postage cost to you. But please be sure to mail early as postmarks do not count. To check your registration status, you may go to oregonvotes.gov/myvote. And thank you all, and everyone be well.
Thank you.